Okay, so the first step we want to take is let's first try to optimize a JPEG. And specifically, I'm going to work with Adobe Photoshop CS6. You can use previous versions of Photoshop with this tutorial. The functionality is available for those previous versions. So when you have a finished product and you're ready to save, one of the first basic steps you want to take is go to File, and instead of going to Save As or Save, let's go to Save for the Web. And this brings up a dialog box for you with a bunch of different options to optimize your image. Now it automatically gave me PNG or PNG. As we discussed earlier, because this image has a bunch of complex colors, let's zoom this out for a second, because it has some complex colors, we don't want to go with anything else other than a JPEG, so let's go for JPEG. And then also the next step we want to take is the image size itself. Now obviously we don't want to use an image that's 1536 by 1024 because that's going to make the download time longer than necessary. So let's say that I wanted this image to be the full size of my page. So let's do 960. And when you go to change these numbers, make sure that you have the lock engaged over here before you change any numbers so that when you change one, the other one will proportionally change with it. So let me click out of that and it will make the change for me. Okay, so now that we have the image at the size that we want it, there are some options for you to view your image. We can look at the original itself, and it gives us the file size of the original at 960 at 1.76 megabytes. We also have the optimized view for just one view for you. Two up, you can see two different views at the same time. You can change the settings for the new optimize, and it compares it to the original for you. 4 up gives you even more options. You can see it 3 different settings compared to the original. Now let's stay in the 4 up for a second, and we're actually going to change a few of these. General rule of thumb for you is you want to start out at about an 85 quality. And that's about like the first step that we want to take just to see how it affects the overall image's quality. The next one we want to do is, let's do a 50. And then finally, let's go for a 20. Now, as you can see here, not too much has changed. We can see over here in the 20 that some of the quality really degraded, so we really don't want to go with that. When we look at the 50, we see that it's pretty crisp. The background itself looks pretty good compared to the original. We're starting to see a little bit of degradation, but not too much compared to over here at the 20. You can see some pretty heavy pixelation. So we want to be somewhere between a 50 and a 20. So let's get rid of the 20. Let's bring this down to a 40 and see what happens. Now we see that there's still some pixelation here, so let's do 45. There's some pixelation here still, so I think that's what tells us is that a 50 is probably where we want to stick. Now the next step that we can take with optimization is focusing on the blur. Images optimize better when there is more blur to the image rather than crisp edges. It makes optimization easier. So let's add just a little bit of blur to this image. Now take note before we do that our image file size at a 50 quality is a 63.03 kbs. Let's add a little bit of blur and see what that does for us. Let's do 0.2. And with that, it drops our image's size down to a 61.25. So that's pretty good. If we want to take this to the next level, we can do some adjustments before we even come into the Save for Web dialog box. So before we leave, remember the number 61.25K at a 50 quality. That is where we left our image at, so let's cancel out of this for a second. In the back end, we can change we can adjust two different aspects of our image. One of them being our contrast, and another one being our saturation. Now I'm specifically going to use the adjustment layers rather than doing this directly to the image. So let's first work on the contrast over here in our box here. So for the contrast, let's drop it down and see, visually see where it kind of breaks down a bit. Getting to be a little too light over here, so let's pull it back. I think a 20 looks pretty good. And let's go for the saturation next. Now with saturation, that directly affects your colors, so we don't want to drop that down too much. So we have to go move very slowly. And here we're starting to see the colors really start to fade, so let's pull this back. 10 looks pretty good. Alright, so let's return back to our save for the web. Now we already found that 50 quality would work best for us, so let's pull it back to just a one image and change it back to JPEG. So 50 quality, let's change the image size back to our 960. And then finally let's add in our blur as well. So then adding in those adjustment layers, that brought our total file size down to 58.47 Ks. So there it shows that adding those two adjustments also helped with our optimization. So at this point, I think we are ready to save.